Here is your professionally rewritten Part 1, keeping the meaning, structure, and length intact while improving clarity and polish. I bled out on an operating table while my parents partied at my sister's gala, insisting I was being overdramatic. After my recovery, I quietly erased them from my life. They only understood when their own emergency struck and my phone stayed silent. The hospital bracelet left a pale ring around my wrist for weeks after they removed it. Sometimes I catch myself rubbing that spot, searching for something that isn't there anymore. Funny how the smallest physical reminders outlast the biggest emotional wounds. Or maybe it's the other way around. My name is Rebecca Hartley, and I almost died on a Tuesday. It began 3 months before that Tuesday with what I assumed was just stress. Working as a marketing director at a pharmaceutical company in Boston meant long hours and constant pressure. So, when my abdomen started aching, I blamed it on too much coffee and not enough sleep. By the time the pain became impossible to ignore, I had already convinced myself it was nothing serious. The irony wasn't lost on me that I worked for a company that made diagnostic equipment. Yet I couldn't diagnose my own deteriorating health. My younger sister Vanessa had always been the star of our family. She'd graduated summa cum laude from Yale, landed a position at a prestigious investment firm in Manhattan, and recently gotten engaged to Preston, whose family owned half of Connecticut. My parents, Richard and Diane Hartley, had spent the last 6 months planning Vanessa's engagement gala as if it were a royal wedding. I'd been hearing about nothing else since March. The venue at the Botanical Gardens, the live orchestra, the designer dress Vanessa had commissioned, the guest list that read like a Forbes magazine directory. Every Sunday dinner at my parents' house in Cambridge became a planning session where I nodded along while my mother obsessed over centerpiece arrangements and my father debated wine selections. "Rebecca, you're coming, obviously," my mother had said during one of these dinners, not quite making it a question. "Vanessa wants you there." "Of course," I'd replied, pushing food around my plate while my stomach cramped. I wouldn't miss it. The gala was scheduled for November 15th. My emergency surgery was scheduled by my body for the same night, though I didn't know it yet. The pain had gotten progressively worse throughout October. I'd gone to my doctor twice. The first time, she suggested it might be related to stress and prescribed medication for acid reflux. The second time, she ordered an ultrasound, which showed something abnormal on my appendix but wasn't conclusive. She referred me to a specialist, but the earliest appointment was 3 weeks away. "If the pain becomes unbearable, go to the emergency room," she told me. "Don't wait." I nodded, collected my prescriptions, and went back to work. Looking back, I can see how stupid that was. But when you're living inside the situation, everything seems manageable until suddenly it isn't. I'd taken ibuprofen like candy and kept showing up to meetings, kept responding to emails, kept pretending everything was fine because admitting otherwise felt like admitting weakness. My boyfriend Nathan had noticed I wasn't eating much. We'd been together for 2 years, living in my apartment in Back Bay, and he'd grown concerned enough to suggest I push harder for answers. But Nathan was an architect who traveled constantly for work, and he'd left for a project in Seattle the week before the gala. We talked on the phone, and I minimized how bad things had gotten because I didn't want him to worry from 3,000 miles away. The morning of November 15th started badly. I'd woken up at 4 a.m. with pains so intense I spent 20 minutes in the bathroom, trying not to vomit. By the time I got ready for work, I was sweating despite the November cold. I called in sick, something I almost never did, and spent the day curled up on my couch with a heating pad pressed against my side. Around 2 p.m., my mother called. "Rebecca, please tell me you're getting ready," she'd said without preamble. "The gala starts at 7, and you know how your sister gets when people are late." "Mom, I'm really not feeling well." My voice had come out weaker than I intended. "I think I might need to skip tonight." The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "You're joking," my mother finally said. Her tone had turned icy. "Rebecca, this is your sister's engagement gala. She's been planning this for months." "I know, but I'm in a lot of pain. I've been dealing with this stomach issue, and today it's really bad." "You've always been dramatic about being sick." My mother's words had cut through the phone like a blade. "Remember when you convinced yourself you had mono in high school and it turned out to be a cold? Or when you thought you'd broken your ankle on that ski trip and it was just a sprain?" "Mom, this is different." "It's always different with you, Rebecca. You get a little discomfort and suddenly it's a medical emergency." She'd sighed, the kind of exasperated sound she'd perfected over years of what she perceived as my overcautious tendencies. "Take some Tylenol and pull yourself together. Your sister needs you there." "We all do. Don't Don't embarrass us by being the only family member who doesn't show up. The guilt hit me immediately, which I'm sure was her intention. My mother had always known exactly which buttons to push, and the don't embarrass the family button was her favorite. I'll try, I'd said weakly. You'll do more than try. Be there by 6:30. We need photos before guests arrive. She'd hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding my phone, feeling the pain pulse through my abdomen in waves, and wondered if maybe she was right. Maybe I was being overdramatic. Maybe this was just a bad day. I had pushed through it for a few hours. Vanessa was my only sibling. Despite our different paths in life, despite the way my parents clearly favored her accomplishments over mine, she was still my little sister. By 5 p.m., I convinced myself I could make it. I'd gotten dressed in the cocktail dress I bought specifically for the gala, done my makeup carefully to hide how pale I'd become, and ordered a rideshare to take me to the botanical gardens. Every bump in the road sent fresh spikes of agony through my torso, but I breathed through it. The venue was spectacular, I had to admit. Thousands of tiny lights had been strung through the greenhouse, turning the space into something out of a fairy tale. Vanessa looked absolutely stunning in her champagne-colored gown, and Preston stood beside her, looking appropriately proud. My parents had been holding court near the entrance, greeting guests with the kind of social grace that came from years of practice. "Rebecca, finally," my father had said when he spotted me. "We were beginning to think you'd actually skip your own sister's celebration." "I told you she'd come," my mother had added, air-kissing both my cheeks. "Though you do look a bit pale, darling, you should visit the powder room before photos." I made it through the formal family photos, though I had to lean against the pillar between shots. I made it through the first hour of the gala, nursing a glass of ginger ale and avoiding the catering tables because the thought of food made me nauseous. I even made it through my mother introducing me to several of Preston's family friends. People whose names I forgot immediately because the pain had started drowning out everything else. Around 8:30, I found my mother near the bar. "Mom, I really need to go home. Something's really wrong." She looked at me with barely concealed irritation. "Rebecca, we haven't even done the toast yet. Can you please just hold on for another hour?" "I don't think I can. The pain is getting worse." "Then sit down somewhere quiet for a bit. There's a bench in the orchid room, but you absolutely cannot leave before Vanessa and Preston cut the cake. It would devastate her." I tried to argue, but my mother had already turned away to greet someone else, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. The orchid room had been empty and blessedly cool. I'd sat on the bench, my mother suggested, bending forward slightly because that position hurt fractionally less than sitting up straight. Through the glass walls, I could see the party continuing. The orchestra played, people laughed and danced. Vanessa glowed in the center of it all. The pain reached a crescendo around 9:15. One moment I was breathing through the cramps, and the next something ruptured inside me, and the world went white with agony. I tried to stand up, and immediately collapsed. I don't remember much after that. Fragments come back sometimes, usually at 3 a.m. when I can't sleep. The cold tile floor against my cheek, someone screaming for help, the taste of copper in my mouth, being lifted onto a stretcher, the ceiling of the greenhouse spinning above me as they wheeled me through the crowd. Later, much later, one of Vanessa's friends told me what the scene looked like from the outside. I'd been lying on the floor of the orchid room in a spreading pool of blood. My champagne dress had turned crimson while paramedics worked frantically to stabilize me. The entire gala had ground to a halt. Guests crowded around trying to see what was happening. Someone had called 911, and my parents had been furious about the disruption. According to this friend, who had been shocked enough by their reaction to remember it clearly, my mother had actually said, could she really not have held on until after the cake cutting? I'd been rushed to Massachusetts General Hospital, where doctors discovered that my appendix hadn't just ruptured but had apparently been slowly leaking for days, filling my abdominal cavity with infection and internal bleeding. I needed emergency surgery immediately. My condition had been critical enough that the surgical team briefly considered that it might be too late. The surgery lasted for hours. I flatlined twice on the operating table. The surgeon later told Nathan, who'd caught the first flight back from Seattle, that I'd come within minutes of dying from septic shock and blood loss. While I was bleeding out in the operating room, my family had been in the botanical gardens. The gala continued after the ambulance left. My parents made an announcement that I'd had a medical episode but was being taken care of, and then they proceeded with the planned schedule. The toast was made, the cake was cut, the orchestra played until midnight. Not one member of my family came to the hospital that night. I woke up 36 hours later in the ICU, intubated and connected to so many machines. I looked like something out of a science fiction movie. Nathan was there, sleeping in the chair beside my bed. When I opened my eyes, he immediately called for the nurse and held my hand while I tried to understand what had happened. My parents visited on the third day. I'd been moved to a regular room by then, though I was still in significant pain and hooked up to 4 antibiotics. They arrived around 2 p.m., my mother carrying a small bouquet of supermarket flowers. "Rebecca, thank God you're all right," my mother said, setting the flowers on the windowsill. "You gave us quite a scare." My father stood near the door, looking uncomfortable in the way people do when confronted with illness. "The doctor said you're going to make a full recovery." I stared at them, my mind still foggy from pain medication but clear enough to recognize the absence of any real concern in their voices. "You didn't come," I said. My throat was raw from the breathing tube. "I almost died and you didn't come. The doctor said you were in surgery and there was nothing we could do." My mother replied, arranging the flowers unnecessarily. It seemed more practical to stay with Vanessa. She was absolutely distraught about what happened. Distraught that I ruined her party. "You mean?" My mother's expression hardened. "That's unfair. Your sister was genuinely worried about you." "But yes, Rebecca, your timing was incredibly unfortunate. Do you have any idea how much that gala cost? How many important people were there?" Preston's parents were mortified by all the chaos. I felt something crack inside me, something that had probably been fracturing for years, but finally split completely in that moment. "I almost died." "But you didn't," my father interjected, his tone suggesting we should all be grateful and move on. "The doctor saved you. It all worked out fine. No need to be melodramatic about it." Melodramatic, there was that word again. "I need you to leave," I said quietly. "Rebecca, don't be childish," my mother started, but I cut her off. "Yeah, both of you. Now." They exchanged glances, and I saw my mother's mouth tighten in that way it did when she was displeased but trying to maintain composure. "Fine, we'll come back when you're feeling more rational. Clearly, the medication is making you emotional." After they left, I cried for the first time since waking up. Nathan held me as carefully as he could without disturbing any of my tubes and wires. And I sobbed into his shoulder until I exhausted myself back into sleep. Vanessa texted me for days after the surgery. "Mom said you're awake. Glad you're okay. Sorry the timing of everything was so awful." Sorry the timing was awful. Not sorry I'd nearly died. Not sorry she hadn't visited. Sorry about the timing. As if my medical emergency had been an inconvenient scheduling conflict. I stared at that text for a long time before deleting it without responding. The hospital had kept me for 8 days total. Nathan had been there every moment he wasn't forced to go home and shower or sleep. My best friend from college, Alexis, had driven up from New York twice to visit. Several coworkers had sent cards and flowers. My parents hadn't returned. Vanessa hadn't visited. On the day I was discharged, my mother called while Nathan was helping me get dressed in actual clothes instead of a hospital gown. "Your father and I think you owe Vanessa an apology," she announced. I almost dropped the phone. "Excuse me, her engagement gala was supposed to be the highlight of her year, Rebecca. Instead, the entire evening ended up being about you and your medical drama." Several guests left early. The photographer couldn't get all the shots Vanessa wanted because of the ambulance and police cars outside. Preston's mother has been asking invasive questions about our family's health history. The whole thing was embarrassing. I was dying. "Mom, I'm sorry that interrupted the party." "See, this is exactly the attitude I'm talking about. You've always had to make everything about you. Even as a child, you couldn't stand when Vanessa got attention." Something cold and clear settled over me as she talked. The medication fog had lifted enough for me to hear exactly what she was saying and what she wasn't saying. "You're right," I said, my voice flat. "I apologize for nearly dying at an inconvenient time. It won't happen again." "Well, that's more like it. I'm glad you're finally being reasonable about this. We'll have you over for dinner once you've recovered, and we can all move past this unpleasantness." "Sure, Mom. I'll let you know when I'm feeling up to it." I hung up and looked at Nathan, who had been standing there with my shoes in his hands and absolute fury on his face. "Did she seriously just—" he started, but I shook my head. "I need you to take me home. We can talk about it later." The ride back to my apartment was quiet. Nathan helped me up the stairs, got me settled on the couch with pillows and blankets, made sure I had my medications, water, and everything I might need within reach. Then he sat down beside me, careful not to jostle me. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I had been thinking about that question since my parents' hospital visit, but the phone call had crystallized something in my mind. I'm going to let them go, I said. What do you mean? I mean, I'm done. With my parents, with Vanessa, with all of it. They've shown me exactly where I rank in their priorities, and I'm tired of pretending it doesn't matter. Nathan squeezed my hand. I support whatever you decide. You know that, but are you sure? These are permanent decisions. Becca. They chose permanence when they stayed at that party while I was dying. I'm just honoring their choice. The plan formed gradually over the next few weeks as I recovered. I hadn't set out to hurt anyone or get revenge in some dramatic fashion. I'd simply decided to remove myself from their lives as cleanly and completely as possible. The way you'd excise a tumor. I started small. I stopped responding to my mother's texts and calls. When she complained to my father, who then called me himself. I answered once to tell him I was busy with recovery and would reach out when I was ready. Then I stopped answering his calls. 2. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks after my surgery. Nathan and I flew to Colorado to spend it with his parents, people who had been more concerned about my health in one phone call than my own family had been through the entire ordeal. I ignored the increasingly irritated messages from my mother, demanding to know where I was and why I'd missed dinner without informing anyone. Christmas was the real test. My family had a tradition of gathering at my parents' house on Christmas Eve, a formal affair that had been sacred in the Hartley household for as long as I could remember. My mother called me 2 weeks before Christmas to confirm I'd be attending. I let it go to voicemail. Then I blocked her number. I did the same with my father's number and Vanessa's, and with the handful of relatives who started reaching out on my mother's behalf to ask why I was being difficult. The silence was immediate and absolute. No calls, no texts, no emails. I made myself unreachable and invisible. Nathan asked me several times if I was sure about the decision. I was sure. For the first time in my adult life, I felt light. Without the constant weight of their expectations and disappointments pressing down on me. I changed my phone number in January and didn't give the new one to any family members. I moved to a different apartment in February, one in Brooklyn that none of them knew the address to. I blocked them on every social media platform. I even changed my emergency contact information at work and with my doctors. By March, I had effectively vanished from my family's life. I heard through Alexis, who'd run into an old family friend, that my parents were confused at first, then annoyed, then genuinely bewildered by my absence. Apparently, they had driven to my old apartment building only to be told by the landlord that I'd moved and left no forwarding address. They seem to think you've had some kind of breakdown. Alexis had told me over coffee. Your mom was asking if I knew where you were, if you were okay. She seemed actually worried. She's worried about how it looks that her daughter disappeared, I corrected. She's not worried about me. Alexis studied me carefully. You really think you can keep this up forever? I don't know about forever, but I can keep it up as long as I need to. The truth was, I felt better than I had in years. Work had improved because I wasn't constantly distracted by family drama. My relationship with Nathan had deepened because I wasn't using him as an emotional buffer against my parents' criticism. I'd started running again, slowly rebuilding the strength I'd lost during my recovery. I'd even taken up painting, something I'd loved in college but had abandoned because my mother considered it a waste of time. 8 months passed like that. 8 months of peace and autonomy and freedom from the constant judgment I'd lived under my entire life. And then my father had a heart attack. I found out about it purely by accident. I'd been at a conference in New York in late July, and I ran into one of Preston's cousins in the hotel elevator. She recognized me immediately and launched into a sympathetic speech about how awful everything with my father must be, and how she hoped he'd recover quickly. I stood there in the elevator trying to process what she was saying. I'm sorry. What happened to my father? Her face fell. Oh God, you don't know. I thought your family must have told you. Told me what? Your dad had a heart attack 3 days ago. He's at Mount Auburn Hospital. I just assumed you'd be there, or at least that someone would have called you. I got off the elevator on the wrong floor and spent 10 minutes in a hallway alcove staring at my phone. They tried to reach me. Of course they had, but I'd blocked all their numbers months ago, and I'd been completely unreachable. The question was whether I cared. I called Nathan from New York. He answered immediately, heard the shake in my voice, and let me talk through the decision out loud. He's my father, I said. Regardless of everything else, he's still my father. Maybe I should go to the hospital. Do you want to see him? Nathan asked carefully. Or do you feel like you should see him? Because those are different things. Becca, I thought about the hospital room 8 months ago. About my parents arriving on day 3 with grocery store flowers. About my mother telling me I owed Vanessa an apology while I was still recovering from nearly dying. I don't want to see him, I admitted. I don't feel anything except maybe distant concern, like hearing about a stranger's misfortune. Then you have your answer. I stayed in New York for the rest of the conference. I checked the news briefly and found a small article mentioning that Richard Hartley, prominent Boston attorney, had suffered a cardiac episode but was in stable condition. Then I put my phone away and went to dinner with colleagues. My father survived. According to the follow-up article I found a week later, he'd had emergency stent placement and was in stable condition. Though the article mentioned he'd suffered significant heart damage, I felt relieved that he was okay, but I hadn't contacted them. The real confrontation came in September, almost a full year after the gala that had nearly killed me. I was at a restaurant in Cambridge with Nathan, celebrating my promotion to senior director. When I looked up from my menu and saw Vanessa standing 3 tables away, she saw me at exactly the same moment. Her face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, anger before she excused herself from her dinner companions and walked directly to our table. "Rebecca," her voice was sharp enough to cut. "Where the hell have you been?" I set down my menu carefully. "Vanessa, nice to see you." "Nice to see me. Are you kidding?" She kept her voice low, conscious of the other diners, but her fury was obvious. "You disappeared for almost a year. Mom and Dad have been losing their minds trying to find you. Dad had a heart attack, and you couldn't even be bothered to visit him in the hospital." "I wasn't informed he'd had a heart attack." "Because you blocked all of our numbers. You moved without telling anyone. You cut us off completely, like we meant nothing to you." Her hands were shaking. "What is wrong with you?" I looked at my sister, this person I'd grown up with and barely recognized anymore, and felt nothing but a distant sort of sadness. "I almost died, Vanessa, on an operating table while you and Mom and Dad were at your party, eating cake." "That's not fair. We didn't know how serious it was. The ambulance said you were stable." "I flatlined twice during surgery. The doctor said I came within minutes of dying. And not one person from my family came to the hospital that night." I kept my voice steady. "Matter of fact, you texted me days later to say you were sorry about the timing." Vanessa's face flushed. I didn't know what to say. It was awkward. "It was awkward," I repeated. "My near-death experience was awkward for you. You're being unfair. Mom and Dad visited you. They brought you flowers. 3 days later, after calling me melodramatic and suggesting I'd ruined your party on purpose, I picked up my water glass just to have something to do with my hands. You want to know what's wrong with me? Nothing. For the first time in my life, nothing is wrong with me. I'm healthy. I'm happy. I have people around me who actually care whether I live or die." "We care," Vanessa insisted, but the words sounded hollow. "You care about how my absence affects you. That's not the same thing." "So what? You're just never going to speak to us again. You're going to pretend you don't have a family?" "I'm not pretending anything. I'm simply choosing not to maintain relationships with people who've demonstrated that I don't matter to them unless I'm performing the role they want me to play." Vanessa stood there for another moment, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to say something else but couldn't find the words. Finally, she just shook her head. "You changed. I nearly died. That changes a person." She walked back to her table after that, and I watched her make some excuse to her dinner companions before leaving the restaurant entirely. Nathan reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, surprised to find that I meant it. "I really am." The final piece came 2 months later in November, almost exactly a year after the gala. I was at my apartment when someone buzzed from the lobby. The doorman called up to tell me that Diane Hartley was there asking to see me. I almost told him to send her away, but there was something in his voice, some note of concern that made me pause. "Is she all right? She seems quite distressed, Miss Hartley. She's been crying." I told him to send her up, and I waited by the door of my apartment with my arms crossed and my defenses fully raised. My mother looked smaller than I remembered, older. Her makeup was smudged from tears, and she was clutching her handbag like a lifeline. "Rebecca." Her voice broke on my name. "Please, can we talk?" I let her in but didn't offer her a seat. We stood in my entryway, 2 feet apart but miles distant. "Mom, what's wrong?" "It's your father. He had another episode yesterday. They don't think." She stopped, pressed her hand to her mouth. "The doctors don't think he has much time. His heart is failing." The shock was immediate and disorienting. What I thought he'd recovered. The article said he was fine. He wasn't managing his medication properly. He went back to working too many hours. Too much stress. His heart kept getting weaker. Yesterday, she started crying in earnest. "Rebecca, please. He's asking for you. He wants to see you before." She trailed off. "Please." I stood there in my apartment, looking at my mother crying, and tried to access some feeling about what she'd just told me: sadness, grief, anger that he'd let his health deteriorate, but the well I'd drawn from my entire life had run dry. Why didn't you come to the hospital? The question slipped out before I consciously decided to ask it. That night, when I was dying, why didn't you come? My mother wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara further. What? It's a simple question. I'd like an answer before I make any decisions about seeing Dad. Rebecca, your father is dying, and I almost died while you ate cake and posed for photos. So I'll ask again. Why didn't you come to the hospital? She looked genuinely confused, as if she couldn't understand why I was bringing up something so obviously ancient and irrelevant to her. The doctor said you were in surgery. There was nothing we could have done. You could have been there when I woke up. You could have canceled the rest of the party. You could have acted like you cared even a little bit that your daughter might not survive the night. We did care. But Vanessa needed us, too. The gala was more important than me. I know you've made that abundantly clear. My mother's face hardened, some of her usual steel returning. You've always been jealous of your sister. Even now, you can't let go of that petty resentment long enough to be there for your dying father. I'm not jealous of Vanessa. I'm angry that my parents valued her party over my life. It wasn't like that. It was exactly like that. And you know what the worst part is? You still don't think you did anything wrong. Even now you're here asking me to drop everything and come to Dad's bedside. And you can't understand why I might hesitate after you couldn't do the same for me. That's different. How? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. You survived by chance. Asterisk, the surgeon told Nathan it could have gone either way. I survived despite your absence, not because of anything you did. So this is it. My mother's voice turned bitter. You're going to let your father die without saying goodbye because you're holding on to some grudge about a party. It wasn't about the party, Mom. It was never about the party. It was about the fact that when I needed you most, you chose something else, someone else. And then you had the audacity to tell me I was being melodramatic and that I owed Vanessa an apology. I was upset. The whole evening had been ruined. There it is again. The evening, the event? Never mind that I'd nearly died. Never mind that I'd been bleeding internally for days and you called me dramatic when I said I couldn't come. The only thing that mattered was that your plans got disrupted. My mother straightened her shoulders, her tears drying as her natural imperiousness reasserted itself. Fine, I can see you've made up your mind about all of this. You've decided we're villains in your story. And nothing I say will change that. But your father loves you, Rebecca. Whatever you think about me or Vanessa, he's still your father, and he's dying. Can you really live with yourself if you don't at least say goodbye? I thought about that question for a long moment. Could I live with it? The answer surprised me with its clarity. Yes, I said, I can, because I already said goodbye when I woke up in the ICU and realized none of you cared enough to be there. Anything else would just be repeating myself. You'll regret this, maybe, but it'll be my regret to carry, not yours. My mother left without another word. I watched from my window as she got into her car and drove away, and I waited for the guilt or grief to hit me. It never did. My father died 2 days later. I learned about it from an obituary in the Boston Globe. The service had been held at a church in Cambridge. Well attended according to the article, with speeches from colleagues and family members. I read the whole thing, sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee and feeling disconnected from the entire narrative. Nathan had been worried about me. Are you sure you're okay? It's normal to have complicated feelings about this. I'm sure. I feel sad that he's gone, but I feel sad the way I'd feel about any person dying. Not the way I'd feel about losing my father. I looked up at him. Does that make me a terrible person? No. Asterisk, it makes you a person who protected herself from people who hurt you. Vanessa had somehow gotten my new number, probably from a mutual contact or old colleague, and left a voicemail after the funeral. I listened to it once. She was sobbing, calling me heartless and cruel, saying I'd killed our father with my selfishness by not being there when he needed me most. I deleted the message without responding. The months after that were quiet. I threw myself into work, got engaged to Nathan that spring, and started planning a small wedding for just close friends. I built a life that had no space in it for the family I'd been born into. Sometimes people asked about my parents, and I developed a simple response. We're not in contact. Most people were polite enough not to press for details. A year after my father's death, almost 2 years after the gala, I was walking through Boston Common when I saw my mother sitting on a bench. She was alone, feeding pigeons from a bag of breadcrumbs, and she looked so diminished that I almost walked past without recognizing her. She looked up as I approached, and our eyes met. I saw her register who I was. Saw her face shift through a dozen micro-expressions before settling into something like resignation. I sat down beside her, maintaining a careful distance. "How are you?" I asked. "I'm fine." Her voice was quiet, lacking its usual sharp edges. "How are you?" "I'm well. I got engaged." "Congratulations," she said automatically, without inflection. To Nathan, "Yes." We sat in silence for a while, watching the pigeons fight over breadcrumbs. "Your sister got married last month," my mother finally said. "Small ceremony. Just family." "Well, what's left of it? I hope she's happy." "She is. Preston treats her well." Another pause. "She asks about you sometimes. Does she?" "She feels guilty about what happened. About all of it. She should." My mother turned to look at me then. "Really? Look at me. Do you hate us?" The question hung in the air between us. I considered lying, considered saying something diplomatic, but settled on the truth instead. "No. I don't hate you. I just don't need you anymore." "That's worse somehow." She laughed, but it sounded more like a sob. "Hate would at least mean we still matter to you. You had a choice, Mom. Every single day, you had a choice about how to treat me, how to prioritize me, how to show up for me. And every single time, you chose something else, someone else. Eventually, I stopped waiting for you to choose me. I did choose you. I'm your mother. Being my mother is biology. Choosing me would have meant acting like it." She crumpled the empty bread bag in her hands. "Your father asked for you before he died. Did you know that?" "Not just that night when I came to your apartment. In the hospital. In those final hours he kept saying your name." The information landed without impact. "I'm sorry, he died wanting something I couldn't give him. But he taught me that lesson himself. People don't always get what they want. Especially when they've spent years making it clear that someone doesn't matter to them." "We never said you didn't matter. You didn't have to say it, Mom. You showed me over and over and over again." The gala was just the final confirmation of something I'd known my whole life. My mother wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know how to fix this." "You can't. That's what I've been trying to tell you. There's nothing to fix because I'm not broken. I'm just done. So this is permanent. You're never coming back." I stood up, brushing invisible crumbs from my jeans. "I'm not coming back because I was never really there to begin with. You were so busy polishing Vanessa into the perfect daughter that you never noticed I'd already left. Rebecca, I hope you have a good life, Mom. I genuinely mean that. I hope Vanessa's marriage is happy, and you get grandchildren, and all the things you wanted. I just won't be part of it." I walked away then, leaving her on that bench, and I didn't look back. That was 3 years ago now. I'm 34 years old. I married Nathan in a ceremony at a vineyard in Napa Valley with 40 of our closest friends in attendance. We bought a house in Newton. I made partner at my firm last year. We're talking about starting a family. My life is full and rich and completely separate from the people who raised me. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. Usually these thoughts come late at night when Nathan is asleep beside me and I'm scrolling through my phone, seeing other people's family photos and feeling that phantom ache where something used to be. But then I remember the hospital bracelet around my wrist. I remember the cold of the operating table. I remember waking up and realizing that the people who were supposed to love me most in the world had chosen a party over my life. And I remember that choosing myself wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It wasn't even really a choice at all. It was survival. Last week, I got a letter forwarded through my old law school address. It was from Vanessa, written in her precise handwriting on expensive stationery. She's pregnant, due in January. She wanted me to know. She said she'd been thinking about family and what it means, and how she wished things were different between us. She didn't apologize. Not for the gala, not for the text about timing, not for any of it. She just said she hoped that maybe the baby could be a fresh start for all of us. I read the letter twice, then put it in a drawer where I keep other artifacts from my old life, my hospital discharge papers, the obituary for my father, the blocked numbers list that used to be my family contacts. Maybe someday I'll feel differently. Maybe someday the anger will fade enough that I'll want to meet my niece or nephew, want to try again with people who've proven they don't know how to love me the way I need to be loved. But probably not. Because here's what I've learned in the years since I almost died on that operating table. You can't force people to care about you. You can't make them prioritize you. You can't convince them that you matter when they've already decided you don't. What you can do is accept the truth of who they are and what they're capable of giving you, and then you can decide whether that's enough. For me, it wasn't so I chose silence. I chose absence. I chose to remove myself from an equation where I was always going to be the variable that didn't matter. They call it ghosting. I suppose cutting people off. Going no contact. I call it self-preservation. Nathan asked me the other night if I ever regret it. We were cooking dinner together, moving around our kitchen in the synchronized way of people who've learned each other's rhythms. And he asked the question casually, like he'd been thinking about it for a while. Do you ever wish you'd given them another chance? After your dad died, or when your mom reached out, or now with Vanessa's baby? I thought about it while I chopped vegetables for the salad. No, because another chance implies they deserved a first chance and squandered it. But they had hundreds of chances. Every day of my childhood. Every moment they chose to dismiss me or prioritize Vanessa or make me feel like I was asking for too much by simply existing. The gala wasn't the beginning. It was just the end. You don't think people can change? I think people can change. I'm not sure my family wanted to. They wanted me to go back to accepting whatever scraps they were willing to offer and being grateful for it. I set down the knife and turned to face him. I'm happier now than I've ever been. Doesn't that tell you something? He pulled me into a hug, careful and gentle like he'd been that day in the ICU. It tells me you made the right choice. And I believe that most days. I absolutely believe that. But there are still moments when I see a mother and daughter shopping together and laughing. Or I watch a family reunion video on social media. Or I hear someone casually mention Sunday dinner at their parents' house. And I feel the loss of something I never really had but always wanted. I grieve for the family I should have had. The parents who would have rushed to the hospital and held my hand through the fear. The sister who would have canceled her party to be with me. The people who would have made me feel like my life mattered more than their social calendar. But I don't grieve for the family I actually had, because losing them wasn't a loss. It was a release. The scar from my surgery has faded to a thin white line. Sometimes I trace it with my finger and think about how close I came to dying. How the surgeons saved me when my own family couldn't be bothered to try. That scar is a reminder of my body's resilience, its ability to survive trauma and heal itself even when the damage seemed catastrophic. I like to think I've done the same thing emotionally. The trauma of being unloved by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally nearly destroyed me. But I cut out the infected parts, gave myself time to heal, and built something stronger in its place. My phone has stayed silent for 3 years, no calls from blocked numbers, no letters except Vanessa's pregnancy announcement, no surprise visits or dramatic confrontations. They've finally learned that I meant what I said, that I wasn't bluffing or throwing a tantrum or waiting for them to grovel enough to earn my forgiveness. I was simply done. And here's the thing about being done. It's not dramatic. It's not revenge. It's not even particularly satisfying in the way you might expect. It's just peace. I don't lie awake at night imagining scenarios where they finally understand what they did to me. I don't fantasize about them suffering the way I suffered, learning through their own pain what it feels like to be abandoned when you need someone most. My father's heart attack gave them a taste of that. I suppose my mother reaching out to me in desperation, my phone staying silent, her having to sit with the reality that I wasn't coming no matter how much she needed me to. But I didn't orchestrate that. I didn't plan it. I didn't even feel particularly vindicated when I learned about it later. I just felt nothing. And maybe that's the real revenge, if you want to call it that. Not hating them enough to hurt them, but not loving them enough to save them either. Indifference is the opposite of love, not hate, and I've become completely indifferent to whether my family suffers or thrives, struggles or succeeds, lives or dies. They're strangers to me now, strangers who happen to share my DNA, and my last name, and my childhood home. But strangers nonetheless. Nathan and I are trying for a baby now. When I get pregnant, when I hold my child for the first time, I know I'll think about my parents, about the ways they failed me, and the ways I'll work every day not to fail my own children. I'll teach my kids that they matter, that their pain is real and valid, that when they say they're hurting, I'll believe them instead of calling them dramatic, that no party, no event, no social obligation will ever be more important than their well-being. And I'll do all of that without my family ever meeting their grandchildren. Maybe that makes me cruel. Maybe years from now, my kids will ask why they don't have grandparents on my side. And I'll have to explain that sometimes love isn't enough. That sometimes biology doesn't trump boundaries. That sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from people who hurt you. But I think they'll understand because I'll raise them in a home where understanding comes naturally, where their feelings are respected, where they never have to choose between being heard and being loved. The other day, I was cleaning out my closet and found the dress I'd worn to the gala, champagne-colored. one that had been ruined with blood. I kept it for some reason, shoved in the back of a garment bag, and forgotten until my hand landed on the familiar fabric. I pulled it out and looked at it for a long time. The stains had set permanently, dark rust-colored patches across the silk. It was unwearable, unsalvageable. I threw it in the trash without hesitation. Some things can't be cleaned or repaired or made beautiful again. Some damage is too fundamental, too deep. The only option is to let it go and move on to something new. That dress isn't a metaphor. Or maybe it is. Either way, it's gone now and I'm still here. I'm still here living a life my family will never be part of, building a future they won't witness, becoming a person they'll never really know. And I'm okay with that. Better than okay. Actually, I'm happy. Not in spite of cutting them off, but because of it. Because choosing myself gave me space to become someone I actually like. Someone who doesn't apologize for taking up space, or having needs, or asking to be treated like I matter. So no, I don't feel guilty. I don't lie awake regretting my choices. I don't wonder if I should have tried harder or forgiven more readily or given them the chances they never earned. I simply moved on. And that, more than any dramatic confrontation or calculated revenge, is the most powerful thing I could have done. They wanted me to need them. They expected me to come crawling back eventually, to miss them enough to overlook everything that had happened. Instead, I proved that I never needed them at all. My life is proof that you can survive being unloved by your family. You can thrive. Even, you can build something better from the rubble of broken relationships and failed expectations. You just have to be willing to let go. I let go 3 years ago on an operating table when I flatlined twice and no one from my family was there to notice. And I've been free ever. Asterisk, if this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Feel free to leave a comment and share your own experiences or reflections. And if you'd like to follow more stories like this, make sure to subscribe. Your support means more than you know.